Who's starting with the red team feedback? Red team.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to commend the team for very rich discussions. So it was, in a 10-minute presentation, although they had a very nice PowerPoint, the rich discussions and the interaction in the team was really commendable. And I had the opportunity to be observing the discussions that happened. And there was this dynamic in the team where, people were really wanting to make things better, and move away from the status quo. And there were some very interesting ideas, as you might have seen in the presentation, where they talked about restructuring the district monthly meetings, and that I thought was a very practical, feasible, interesting idea. The other thing that they talked about was public recognition of health workers, and that is something that I think that health workers can really get motivated by that. And then they talked about things that could be very context specific, so you have to design activities that are very context specific, and that is something as well that I appreciated. But most of all, I just think that there was in the group that intention to change the status quo, and I hope the discussions can continue, and within that group, you were a very good group, and so that we can really implement your project and bring it to reality. I don't know if my other teammates have other comments.
I have a question actually for the group regarding some of the post-performance support techniques and strategies and innovations we learned throughout the training, if they had ideas about how best to implement those, and then to loop back that feedback so that the training could then be readdressed to meet some of those gaps in folks' learning and knowledge and skill. We allowed to ask questions of the team, Robin? I just did.
You can certainly ask questions, yeah. And I think it's fine also to ask the peer review group as well what questions you have, not least if we were to take this idea forward in some way or another, what top gaps do you think we'd have to fill in order for it to succeed?
So again, I don't know if Jamil can answer that or anyone from the team. Again, post-training innovations, thoughts about how to incorporate some of the strategies into when you do identify something that may have been missed and learners need something that isn't related, it's related to training, but it's now post-training. What are those options?
And I think one observation that I made was that they were really talking about performance support activities. I mean, and I think at the beginning the presenter did say that we chose on this title, but maybe they were thinking of other things as well. So it was more like on-the-job training. I don't know, maybe the good group can expand, but it wasn't just there was a training event and now post-training until the next training happened. It wasn't like that, something just because there was a training, you have to do post-training. It was more like things that happen in non-formal settings. So I don't know if the group, while we were discussing the strategies, had that kind of take on it, which is performance support and continuous learning, right?
I'm getting nods from Chilunga.
Yeah, our group was very focused on creating a culture of continuous learning, because we thought that whatever training does, if there isn't a culture to receive it, if you don't put those things in place which will support a person being trained and implementing that training and being made accountable, and accountability is just not for the trainee, but for the managers as well. So we thought it was very important that you capacitate managers, that they're able to supervise and supervise effectively, that they're able to plan and plan effectively, and to monitor the planning, and to actually accept responsibility for translating, for the implementation of those skills. Because we made the assumption that before a person goes for training, the institution that they work for must agree that this training is useful for them. If then it is useful for you, then what do you do when the person comes back so that you make sure that that investment you've made is actually useful? So we're thinking of more of a culture, of actually creating a culture, and we're thinking that around this culture there will be a performance support needs, both for the manager and for the trainee, because we observe that some managers actually don't even have the skills to actually manage. And instead of seeing the trainee as an asset, they see them as a threat. So there's a whole culture to change.
So we should then probably move to Team Orange, incentivizing learning. Actually, they could just Team Orange just raise their hands so people know who they are. Dispersed. Hopefully that doesn't mean you fell out for a second.
Okay, number one, it was really a very interesting group. There were so many who participated in this group. I think this is the most well-attended group. And maybe it's really the topic. It's a very interesting topic, so it's new. Maybe it's new to someone. So I was really impressed on the diversity of the experts in the team. They're very experienced. We have plenty of ideas. And it was a very interesting topic as well because it really cuts across the topics around the 6 remaining topics. So that's number one. Yesterday, the structure or the problem statement was that it was really about stopping per diems towards trainings versus today, which was really a game changer, and it is like now changed into or reworded or reframed in such a way that it's about slowly detaching incentives towards a culture of learning. And even that culture of learning and performance, we were stuck up on how to really measure on that one. And I think it's very valid. And it was very good because we really started with data. We really started with evidence that is available. And I again thank to Matthew because there was a trust among the group, I hope I'm correct, that we trust to experts, we trust to evidence, and then we say, okay, this is the one that should be presented. Okay? So that was the process, and having evidence really changed the decision of the group. And we said we need to analyze. Better analysis would give to solutions. Better solutions would fit into what really is the problem that we are solving. And that's why we need to, again, it's a work in progress. We say, what's the measurement of the culture of learning and performance? How do we measure combination of change in competency of a health worker or a trainee, the autonomy, the social relatedness, and all those factors related to systems performance? So I think that's a very good improvement of what we had for this group.
Thank you. Any other comments from the peer review panel?
I was going to throw out one. We talked about incentives as well in a different group, but a lot of times incentives are thought about taking things away, but what about adding things? Sometimes things that are non-monetary. And so I didn't know if the group had discussed that, or if other folks are thinking about that. The idea is not always the removal of something, it can be the addition of something. So more a comment than a question.
Thank you. Anything else on Team Orange? No, in which case let's move to Team Light Blue, creating structures to support change. Rada. Does that team want to raise their hand as well, just so we know who you are?
Yes, so first I have 3 pieces of general feedback, yes, overall. The first piece is actually a deck of cards, the second is a road sign, and the third is a body part. Yes. So the deck of cards, if you've ever made a kind of castle with cards, try to stack them and get them to balance. A lot of the, several of the projects sounded to me like there were so many moving parts, approaches being piled on top of each other, getting to a level of complexity that might be problematic in practice. Or yes, the road sign is just, and actually has very much to do with what the work that Group 3 did is on leadership and the inspirational dimension. Whenever I heard that, that sort of woke me up, and I said, wow, that, yes. And the body part is just the ears. I got excited whenever I heard in your projects this idea that we should actually recognize and listen to people who are having to get work done, and most of the time they don't have support and they don't have any training provision, so recognizing the value of that experience. So with respect to Group 3, so I'm completely biased because this was a group I spent quite a bit of time with, so that's my disclaimer, full disclosure. But I was impressed by, and first how initially difficult it was for them to project themselves in a leadership position, yes, to ultimately proclaim themselves ministers. And they did it, yes, with humor, but there's a serious component, which is that all of the research about how you create and foster a learning culture consistently shows that the biggest driver to strengthen learning culture is leadership for learning. Yes, and I felt that was implicit when talking about stakeholders and these very technical ways we have to talk about how you build consensus. But ultimately, it's, you know, sort of any significant change is going to take people at a very senior decision-making level saying, let's make this happen. And felt like many of the groups, including Group 3, the risk was to just drown in the details. You know, given the very technical nature of the work and the day-to-day drudgery of having to make sure you are generating the evidence and doing all of these other things. I thought for Group 3 that there's a clear problem definition and solution, and again that focus on leadership and mobilizing people, the focus on governance and leadership with government in the driver's seat. I thought that was also a strength. And overall that you could feel there was technical expertise, but that the focus was on inspirational, you know, actually inspiring people, a call to action with, you know, so even going as far as branding their initiative, you know, coming up with a name for it. So I thought that in that space of, you know, in that role-playing space, in that, you know, so there was more room for that inspirational and emotional dimension in a highly technical area. And even though I realize this may be a diplomatic faux pas in this event to mention Google, the folks at Google do have this pretty amazing idea of what they call the moonshots, and sort of having that, going not for incremental change, but for 10x change, and thinking that, especially in a safe space like this, we can actually afford to free ourselves of the shackles of drudgery and constraints and hierarchies, and just allow ourselves to dream a little. And then, of course, when we take our planes back, we'll come back down to reality. So that was my experience, which was inspirational for me to observe Group 3, and that's my feedback to the group as well. Thank you.
Anything the peer review panel would add?
Just want to add a few points that I found were very interesting, and I was quite impressed that the group found that the government is the central piece to it, and they put them in the driving seat, and everything was central towards the government. So that's one very positive point. The other new thing I saw and clearly mentioned was the private-public partnership. So that's, again, sometime an underutilized resource at a country level, and there are many private partners who can do a lot of things. And accountability was built into the project, and that's another positive thing I found. So just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, and the additional thing was they were tying innovation to career change. So that was also, I think, a good idea.
Great. Any questions for our peer reviewers on creating structured support change? Nope. In which case, Team Dark Green, do you want to raise your hand? This is dealing with fragile and insecure states.
So I was mostly with this group, and
was very impressed by the rich discussion, and the group made a project plan based on experience they have, most of the people in the team had in Nigeria, particularly in Borno State. So it's mostly based on that, but it was very great group, highly talented. So I had some comments, mainly positive, that linking the immunization training to broader public health package was a good idea, because you have one shot in a fragile state, you can get in or you can do something. You should do more than just a narrow focus. Like I come from a polio world. Sometime we go for polio things and deep into the field, you have resources, you have a vehicle, but then you are so polio blind that you go there, you do the AFP surveillance and come back. But there is so many other things you could have taken with you in the vehicle, or could have checked the other register. Just opening the refrigerator for a cold chain temperature checkup is a big thing if somebody comes in. So they thought about that why not make it more integrated approach rather than just a narrow immunization focus. So sometimes it's a bad thing, but I think in this situation it was a very good thing that it was an afterthought, but then it was very well developed. And they are putting into the curriculum also the whole comprehensive thing. So it's immunization, MCH, and other things. So that was quite good sort of thinking there. And then, as inherently the fragile states are fragile and they are unpredictable, so there was this customization happening that if the post-training follow-up, which was well thought by the group, is not able to be done with a traditional way, there was a provision for in-house measurement or post-training follow-up, how to do it. The peer-to-peer mentorship as well as measurement or looking at any performance improvement was again a good idea, highly customized, that it's a fragile state, that things are not normal. And another thing which I would mention is that the group of partners which were thought of being involved for resources and implementation was also very comprehensive and well thought of, mainly because the group had such a good experience of already have worked in such a situation. So that came in very handy. Just final comment is this project, as I mentioned, is designed particularly with Nigeria in mind, but I think similar exercise or similar projects should be part of any emergency plan in a fragile state with a funding attached to it to be available to the countries, that if such a situation occurs, there is this way of dealing with workforce capacity building, not only for immunization, but for broader workforce development. So those are my comments for the group 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the panel?
Any additions?
Raider.
Just 2 quick comments through the humanitarian lens. It was mentioned that the project would build a pilot, but a pilot works in a stable environment, and here we're talking about a situation where no 2 crises are the same. So you can think in terms of preparedness rather than just when you don't have stability. And the other is just about the humanitarian imperative in relation to budget. Maybe perhaps being candid about this is going to be expensive to organize an effective intervention in a crisis, but that's the cost of upholding human dignity, and that's also the cost of ensuring that parts of the health system are not destroyed, which will make them much more expensive to build back later. Yes. Either or both arguments work depending on the context and the ears that are listening.
Just a quick comment, particularly for the fragile states, but also more broadly about the recognition of health workforce workload And particularly in these fragile states, also the stress that the health worker might have, and how, the training interventions that we do can sort of reduce that stress, or at least not aggravate, because they are working in really difficult conditions, and to also think of some innovative, interesting ways of, because sometimes they're very short resource, they are sometimes missing very basic things in these, when working in these conditions, so that when they come for training, probably have that opportunity to provide them with some of the resources that are missing, and use that training opportunity more broadly to reduce stress of their workload.
Thank you. Any quick questions for the panel? No, in which case let's move on to Team Light Green, which is incorporating up-to-date information in pre-service training. Who's Team Light Green?
Okay. I think the team has improved compared to yesterday. There was now more clarity. They benefit from a very good evidence coming from WHO assessment on pre-service institutions. So the problem statement was very clear. And they know the issues, they know the problems, and they were very straightforward in their solutions, like improving content, improving skills of teachers, students, and having all those materials. The very good thing really was really considering a task force, an independent task force in countries where they have the flexibility and the autonomy also to really decide things. So I think that was a very good one. And they incorporated whatever learnings we had, like improving smile sheets, incorporating all those new behavior changes in the smile sheets, improving feedback mechanism among the institutions where the graduates would provide the services to training institutions. And they would track and like 6 months or after graduation. So I think that's a very innovative way of measuring performance in the long term, and it would improve learning within the institutions. And really, just a consideration that maybe the group would consider more on really using technology in more effective way, and maybe in scaling up in teaching. So I think that's my comment for the group. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the panel?
I mean, I like the idea of task force, but they also had task force plus a focal point, which I really like, because it's good that the task force, but you still need somebody who would actually implement the idea and keep everybody going, and even the task force going. So that was good.
Good. Team Light Green, any questions for the panel? No? In which case, Team Light Blue, delivering existing training in new ways. Who are you?
I have a little bit of my tactician hat on, being a project manager and managing e-learning projects. These were the two projects, this one and the next one, that had probably the most concrete training need, if you will. So when I joined this group, compliment them on the idea of hitting the ground running. I'd been in there maybe after the first 15 minutes, they were already through the first page of all the questions, had clearly already articulated it, had the the whiteboard or the flip chart already on the third page. So they were definitely hit the ground running. I really like the idea of their kind of three-phased based approach to MLM training. You had the self-study, and Alex, correct me if I'm wrong if I articulate anything different, but the self-study, the peer-to-peer, and the training with supervisor. So some innovative ways there of being able to meet the needs of different audience members. Secondly, the incentive, we talked about a little about incentives. Two ideas that popped in mind that I thought were really good was one, incentivizing people to commit to training by doing the self-study first in order to gain access to the live training. I like that idea a lot. And the idea you have intrinsic motivation right there that I do want to participate in the training, but I've come now with a better base of knowledge so that I can make the live training even more effective. The second was the same thing for the master trainer, and the idea that you've proven your worth, so now there's recognition. Obviously, you've gained the information, so it's a little bit of a carrot, but it rewards also the learner themselves. The only, I guess, constructive criticism to provide the group is I felt a great deal of good methodology was applied, all kinds of great ideas, but almost it felt a little bit too ambitious. A lot of aspects I would have liked to see maybe pulled back a little bit, focused on one area, and dive deep to drive innovations. And I'm getting a head nod because at one point I asked in the thing, what about your evaluation is new and different? And that caused the group to think about, hey, if we actually take the learning, and instead of evaluating whether people learned in pre-study or in the live training or afterwards, what if we figured out also how well or what best modality matches that individual learning need? So the idea, if I have a modular approach, maybe for the self-study, I didn't learn as much as I did live. Well, then I know for those people, I can do an assessment and then match almost like a little personalized curriculum for those individuals. Again, if the training is built that way. So something to think about, again, but I thought the group did a great job.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel? And questions from Team Light Blue? In which case we have our last team, Team Pink, delivering new vaccine introduction training.
Also, yes, represent. Hello again. So for this group, I compliment them very well. I also think there is a lot of improvement or growth from day one to day two, and I'll mention that specifically. New vaccine introduction, a lot of different issues. The group did a great job of identifying problems from the beginning, and I think that was maybe the entire first working session was identifying problems. There's a huge list. And at some points, and I think any training initiative needs to go through that, is which problem are we going to solve? It's very hard to solve every problem at one component. And so I think when the group had a hard time or struggled with a little bit is which component do we want to go focus on? Once they did that, and that was actually today, a lot of clarity came about. The problem statement generated itself, the objectives came very quickly afterwards, and then they came up again with a customized solution. I would like to pressure test a little bit that idea of adapting training to the different levels, and I didn't think that included a needs assessment. What I'd like to see more potentially with that is it a modular structure so it can be adapted and easily replicated in different environments based on the needs of that individual province or district, et cetera. I love their idea. They had two about kind of innovative use of technology with the WhatsApp group for peer follow-up, as well as an SMS testing assessment engine post-training to figure out where the gaps are. I would have loved to hear more about that, and then also, based on that information from evaluation, what then happened next? What training evaluation or intervention would have happened to, again, address that training gap, if you will. Great idea. I just would have liked to see it further. I think if you guys had time, we'd be able to do that. The other thing I mentioned, and several groups have identified this as well, the importance of community recognition. A lot of groups mentioned recognition for the user, but the group actually identified, in addition to stakeholders and their bosses and supervisors and managers, the pride you would have by getting a certain recognition within your community. At the end of the day, that's where these people are serving, that's where they're living, et cetera. So I thought that was a neat element to pull through.
Very good. And comments from the panel?
Just one other thing that they had was, they called it level-specific training. I thought that was important, so we don't waste anybody's time and just target what the particular learner needs to know at their level. So that was a good idea.
Just so we can recognize them, Team Pink was good. Any questions from you for the panel?
Oh boy, I'm on the hot seat now.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask on the necessity of having a need assessment, because it is a new vaccine introduction and we are asked to leverage the available fund for further routine immunization strengthening or other activities. So where can we put the need assessment in this problem?
So maybe the question is why the needs assessment, or where to do it and what to uncover? Right. I think, and the folks in the room may be able to answer better. I have one thought and then Jamel. I think sometimes the needs assessment, regardless of the training, is necessary we as trainers sometimes come in with assumptions and biases about what the learner knows. I know sometimes healthcare workers, some have received training, some haven't. It's been a while, so there's a different level of what the folks need. So I know in new vaccine introductions, it may not be as necessary because the information itself is coming in new. However, any assumptions we have about the learner base is always important to clarify.
Great question, Leah. It's true that it's new information, but what we are also trying to do with new vaccine introduction is to reinforce some of the messages that we give in routine training. It's also a little bit like a refresher because you are getting an opportunity through the new vaccine grants to have this training. Why not use the opportunity to also strengthen the key concepts about routine immunization? So for example, in general, the health workers don't talk about AEFI. So, if you're going to have a new vaccines training, then maybe, with the needs assessment will tell us that that's a gap, or the EPI review will tell you. So it doesn't need to be a very formal training needs assessment, a separate assessment, but maybe look back at the other reviews that have happened and find out what were the training gaps which can be reinforced during the training needs assessment. Denise, you had a...
Yeah, and just thinking the training needs assessment isn't always with the learner. In this example, the needs assessment is probably a lot with the supply end of it to find out, for example, from the pharmaceutical company, from different things, is the registry card going to have to change? Sometimes in doing a training needs assessment, I actually identified that the work process was going to have to change because of this new thing coming. And my example was once with a new kind of software, it was going to actually change the way the worker did their work. And so I learned that by working with the software developer and learning from them. And so the training needs assessment in this example, even assuming that the worker is performing their job currently to standard, you're actually going to find from the supplier and from other areas whether their work is going to be changing and what aspects of it. That way you train them not only on that new vaccine, but also the processes that might have to change in their actual work environment. So that it changes a little. You're not just assessing the learner.
Thank you.
Leah, did we answer your question?
We're going to have to draw the feedback to a close now, but maybe a round of applause for our peer review panel. And, thank you. Now, in addition, Michael, you wanted to make a statement, is that right?
Alrighty, not standing before you as a peer reviewer. Good afternoon. For those of you who haven't met, I'm Michael Woodward, a partner at Bull City Learning. And over the last 2 days, I repeat something we already know. We've gained a great deal of momentum related to putting learning theory into action. I think every group has done a fantastic job. You've collectively come up with new ideas and exciting ways to improve immunization training. However, as Robin mentioned, or George, when you go back to your desks on Monday or whenever you travel back, you may have that question of, well, how do I implement the great ideas and things that I learned, the things that I came up with, the things that I brainstormed? Maybe I can help you with that, or we can help you with that. So I'm pleased to announce that an exciting new request for proposals we're calling the Next Generation EPI Learning Initiative, which will be led by Bull City Learning, but through the generous support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So a couple things about this RFP. We want to encourage, support, and foster innovative ideas for immunization learning and performance improvements. It will build on the conversations and ideas and aspirations we've covered over the last 48 hours, and it strives to enable you to put those ideas into action. We're looking for ideas that are bold and disruptive and have a strong measurement component. One important criteria for consideration for a proposal is that it should not be based on per diem approach that rewards people for simply attending training. We hope that by changing the incentive and structure, we in turn inspire a more direct impact on achieving learning outcomes. We want this RFP to inspire innovative solutions that promote demonstrated advancements in both knowledge and skill. In addition to those objectives, we hope this RFP produces evidence of what works so that it can be widely distributed with others and they can learn from those lessons. So we're still defining the process, the details, but a couple things about where we stand at the moment. So the current plan is to award between 3 to 5 grants. We plan for the proposed projects to be between 12 and 18 months, and that enables both implementation of the solution as well as the monitoring and evaluation activities. We plan to open the RFP in January and then accept proposals through the end of February. If you'd like more information, I'm here as well as Nathan, but you could visit this website, http://info.bullcitylearning.com/EPI. Please enter your contact information, and we'll be happy to share information as it becomes available about the RFP, about the timing, about the submission requirements, and those kind of things. This is more just to keep informed, to be a part of our database to receive ongoing communications. Again, terribly excited about this opportunity. I'm sorry I had to wait till the end of the conference to be able to tell you, but I do think it will support some of the great ideas and innovations that we have discussed today, and to be able to think differently about how we conceptualize and implement EPI learning and performance. So, thank you.